This video is called The Search for the Highest Principle. Think back to the previous video, How Philosophy Can Help. To my example of helping the homeless person. I was concerned about him because I sensed that some ethical principle was at stake. When I dug down to see what the principle might be, I found that I'm committed to human dignity. I felt that living without a home violated the man's dignity. So my principle turned out to be something like, in all of my actions, respect human dignity. Articulating that principle really helped because I could use it as a tool for distinguishing options for action in the situation that would be acceptable or unacceptable. I found that one of my options was unacceptable because it violates the very same principle I was acting on in the first place, when I felt a concern for the unsheltered person. Philosophers throughout human history have been looking for these principles, and in particular, we would like to discover the highest moral principle, which all the other principles are derived from. What do I mean by highest principles and derivative principles? Every field has this distinction, but I'll just give you a fairly simple example of it. Many of us think that two people, let's say a man and a woman, should be paid the same wage for the same work. We could say the same thing of a white person and a person of color, an LGBTQ person, someone who doesn't belong to that community, and so forth. Is that the highest principle or a derivative one? If we think it through, I think we'll realize that it's derivative. Why? Because we can articulate a higher principle that it's derived from. What's the higher principle? There are two ways of saying it. But one pretty good version is that people who contribute equally to something deserve to be rewarded equally. That's basic fairness. And equal pay for equal work is derived from it. The two principles are not the same because the fairness principle applies even outside of job situations and even if there is no money involved. For example, it applies if you're playing a game with your friends, your side wins, and one person is taking all the credit. There's no work, and there's no money involved, but that's not fair. Now, notice that what I call the fairness principle is higher, a higher principle, and I haven't said that it's the highest one. And that's because if we think about it long enough, we might find a principle that is even higher than fairness, that the principle of fairness is derived from. Philosophers are always looking for the highest principle so that we can have one tool that applies to all ethical situations. That's a very tall order, of course, and I think you will end the course still not sure if you've found such a principle. But I think you will get interested in the project. It will be immensely valuable, even if we are able to make any progress at all on it. For example, if we could show that there is one popular answer to the question that is clearly false when we examine it thoroughly, we could rule that out as for sure not being the answer. And that would be progress if we could live the rest of our lives avoiding that particular mistake. Aristotle, for example, whom we'll study in the second half of this course, thinks he can convince us that living for money or reputation is clearly not the highest ethical principle, and he believes he can prove that to us. But now we're getting ahead of ourselves. The four authors we will read each have a different proposal for what the highest principle of ethics is, and each one of them will try to convince us that he or she is correct, and along the way, that all the others are wrong. So we want to look not just at their answers, but at the evidence each one of them gives that her or his answer is the right one. And it won't be black and white. If you develop some nuance and sophistication in your thinking, you will probably decide that each of our four philosophers has some part of the truth. But even if we add all four of them together, we wouldn't have the whole truth. But getting part of the truth and getting some idea of what is missing from it would be great progress. I'm also going to ask you to formulate your own moral theory. Now, don't worry, I don't mean you'll write a whole book about ethics in the next 6 weeks. I just mean that I want you to be able to write a couple of paragraphs at the end of your final paper articulating your own views and why you think that way. And most importantly, what reasons you could offer someone else to try to convince them you're right. Now, your view might change during the course, or you might get better at saying what your view is. But ultimately, I'd like for you to get better at defending your view with reasons, which is an intrinsic part of being an educated person in any area of life.